May 19, 1945. The waters off Portsmouth, New Hampshire lay calm under an overcast sky as a sleek, dark shape broke the surface 3 kilometers from shore. Lieutenant Commander James Hartford stood on the dock with his engineering team, watching the captured vessel approach with a mixture of professional curiosity and personal unease. They believed they were about to unlock the secrets of the most feared weapons system in the Atlantic. They had no idea they were about to discover why thousands of young men had sailed into the depths, knowing their boats were fundamentally flawed from the very beginning. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What began as a routine technical evaluation would transform into a revelation that would shake the American naval establishment, exposing a desperate industrial gamble that had sent men to sea in vessels that were engineering compromises wrapped in propaganda. The truth waiting inside that hull would rewrite everything the Allies thought they knew about their enemy's most celebrated weapon. The submarine was Type 9C, designated U-505 by its former crew, now flying American colors as part of Operation Deadlight, the Allied program to evaluate and dispose of captured vessels from the conflict. Hartford had reviewed the technical specifications dozens of times. Length, 76.7 meters. Displacement, 1,120 tons surfaced, 1,232 submerged. Maximum depth, theoretically, 230 meters. Crew complement, 48 men. The numbers told one story. The vessel approaching the dock was about to tell another. As the submarine secured alongside, Hartford noticed the first anomaly. Water streamed from multiple points along the pressure hull, not the normal drainage from ballast tanks, but steady trickles from what appeared to be the hull itself. His chief engineer, Lieutenant Robert Mackenzie, saw it too. Then Mackenzie said with a low whistle that barely masked his confusion, "I thought these things were supposed to be engineering marvels. Looks like it's crying." The escort officer, a British Royal Navy commander named Philip Winters, who had overseen the vessel's transit from Wilhelmshaven, overheard the comment and allowed himself a thin smile. Winters replied with the weariness of someone who had seen too many of these boats. "Wait until you get inside, gentlemen. Every single one we have brought across has the same issue. We have kept it quiet, but your people need to see this firsthand." Hartford's team spent the next 3 hours conducting their initial external survey. What they documented would fill 47 pages of technical reports, but the essential truth could be summarized in a single observation. The submarine leaked from dozens of points that should have been completely sealed. Hull penetrations for periscopes, antenna masts, and deck fittings all showed evidence of chronic water intrusion. More disturbing were the stress cracks visible around welded seams, particularly near the conning tower base. The next morning, Hartford assembled his full evaluation team in the operations briefing room at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. 12 men, representing expertise in mechanical engineering, metallurgy, electrical systems, and submarine operations. Among them was Chief Petty Officer Daniel Kozlowski, who had served on American submarines in the Pacific and understood pressure hull integrity from hard-won experience. Hartford distributed preliminary findings and posed the central question that would drive their investigation. Why would any navy deliberately send men to sea in vessels with such obvious structural compromises? The answer would take them 6 weeks to fully understand, and when they did, it would reveal a story of desperate industrial improvisation, material shortages, and thousands of young men who had lived with terror, not just from depth charges above, but from the ocean pressing against their hull from all directions. Their first dive test was scheduled for May 24th. The vessel would submerge to 30 meters in controlled conditions, with American crew operating under supervision of the few remaining technical personnel who had been retained from the original crew. One of them was Obermaschinenmat Klaus Richter, a diesel mechanic who had served on 3 different boats during the conflict and survived 2 sinkings. As the diving preparations began, Hartford watched Richter move through the engine room with practiced efficiency, but also with something else that took a moment to identify: resignation. This was not the careful attention of a man maintaining equipment he trusted. This was the mechanical routine of someone who had long ago accepted that his workplace was fundamentally dangerous. Through the interpreter, Hartford asked Richter about his experience with the Type 9 series. The German mechanic's response would be the first crack in the facade of invincible engineering that Allied intelligence had constructed around these vessels. Richter explained with a matter-of-fact tone that carried no drama, only exhausted truth. Every boat leaks, Herr Kommandant. Every single one. The question is never if you will have water coming in, but how much and from where. We spent more time pumping bilges than we ever spent maintaining engines. Some days we would be pumping every 20 minutes. You learn to sleep with the sound of water dripping on your face. The dive began at 1400 hours. Hartford remained on the surface in the escort vessel, receiving constant reports from Mackenzie, who had volunteered to ride the submarine down. The descent itself was smooth, the vessel handling well as it slipped beneath the grey-green waters of the Atlantic. At 15 meters depth, Mackenzie's first report came through. Mackenzie transmitted over the sound-powered telephone with notable tension in his voice. We have water entry at multiple hull penetrations. Forward torpedo room report steady dripping from periscope wells. Engine room has water coming through the main diesel exhaust trunk seal. Conning tower lower hatch is weeping at the rim. Bilge pumps are running. At 20 meters, the situation worsened. Mackenzie's second report carried an edge that Hartford had never heard from his unflappable chief engineer. Water entry has increased significantly. We are pumping continuously now. The men are reporting that every major hull penetration is showing some degree of leakage. I can see it myself from the control room. The whole boat is crying, just like we saw from outside. How did anyone fight from these things? At 30 meters, the test reached its planned depth. Mackenzie's report was comprehensive and damning. He documented in a steady voice that barely concealed his disbelief. We are now at test depth, and the situation is frankly shocking. Water is entering from every major hull penetration point. The periscope wells are streaming water that requires constant mopping. The main induction valve, which should be completely sealed at depth, is leaking around its entire circumference. The torpedo tube doors are sweating water through microscopic gaps. The men down here lived with this constantly. The German mechanic tells me this is actually better than most boats he served on. Commander, the entire pressure hull is weeping like a sieve. They surfaced after 45 minutes submerged, and Hartford immediately ordered a comprehensive internal inspection. What his team discovered over the next week would answer the question of why these submarines leaked, but the explanation would raise even more disturbing questions about the industrial desperation that had created them. The investigation was led by Lieutenant Howard Chen, a metallurgical engineer who had worked in submarine construction at Electric Boat Company before the conflict. Chen's expertise in pressure hull fabrication made him uniquely qualified to understand what they were seeing. His findings would be meticulously documented in a report that would remain classified for 3 decades. Chen began with the most obvious problem, the welds. He took samples from 17 different welded seams throughout the pressure hull. What he found was a masterclass in improvised manufacturing under impossible conditions. Chen explained to the assembled team with the careful precision of someone documenting industrial tragedy. These welds are not simply poor quality. They are fundamentally unsuitable for deep-sea pressure applications. The penetration depth is inconsistent, suggesting welders working at high speed with inadequate supervision. More critically, I am finding multiple instances of what we call cold lap, where the weld metal has not properly fused with the base material. Under pressure, these create channels for water intrusion that no amount of external sealing can prevent. But the welds were only the beginning. The real story was in the steel itself. Chen conducted hardness tests, spectroscopic analysis, and microscopic examination of the hull material. What he discovered would explain not just the leaking, but would reveal the full extent of the material crisis that had plagued production throughout the later years of the conflict. He reported with barely contained astonishment, "Gentlemen, this is not proper submarine-grade steel. The metallurgical analysis shows a material that is significantly inferior to what should have been used. The carbon content is wrong. The alloy composition is inconsistent, and I am finding inclusions of slag and other impurities throughout the samples. This is what happens when you are scraping the bottom of the steel production barrel." Someone made the decision to build these submarines with whatever steel was available, knowing it was unsuitable for the application. Hartford requested clarification on what this meant in practical terms. Chen responded bluntly, "It means that every weld on this pressure hull was performed on steel that could not properly accept the welding process. The base material was already compromised before the first welder struck an arc. At high-speed production, inadequate quality control, and welders who were probably working 12-hour shifts 7 days a week. And you get what we are seeing. A submarine that leaks from the moment it enters the water." The investigation expanded to examine the mechanical systems. Lieutenant Patricia Morrison, one of only 3 female officers on the evaluation team and an expert in hydraulic systems, took responsibility for analyzing the periscope and mast penetrations. Her findings complemented Chen's metallurgical analysis with equally damning evidence of manufacturing shortcuts. Morrison documented in her technical report, "The periscope well seals are using rubber compounds that are completely inappropriate for sustained seawater immersion. We have tested the material and found it becomes brittle and loses elasticity after only weeks of exposure. The German technical manual actually calls for these seals to be replaced every 30 days of operational use, but interviews with crew members indicate this was rarely possible. Most boats operated with degraded seals that were known to leak but could not be replaced due to part shortages. The story emerging from their investigation was one of industrial desperation meeting institutional denial. The vessels had been designed during a period when materials were abundant and quality control was rigorous. But by 1943 and 1944, when production ramped up dramatically, the industrial capacity to build them properly had collapsed under the weight of strategic bombing, raw material shortages, and catastrophic labor depletion. Hartford interviewed Richter again, this time with a more structured set of questions about life aboard operational vessels. The German mechanics' testimony provided the human dimension to the technical failures they were documenting. Richter spoke with the careful recollection of someone who had survived experiences that others had not. "The worst boat I served on was U-673. She was built at the Deschimag yards in Bremen in late 1943. From the moment we left port, she leaked from everywhere. The forward torpedo room crew slept on bunks that were constantly damp. The control room had water dripping on the electrical panels. We jerry-rigged canvas shields over the most sensitive equipment to keep water off. In the engine room, we had water coming through the main exhaust trunk so badly that we had to pump continuously just to keep the bilges from rising." Hartford asked the obvious question, "Why would you go to sea in such a vessel?" Richter's answer was simple and devastating. "Because we had no choice, Herr Kommandant, and because every boat was like this to some degree. You learned to live with it, or you did not go to sea at all. The officers knew, the engineers knew, the command structure knew. But the strategic situation demanded that submarines go on patrol regardless of their condition. So we went. The investigation team documented additional evidence of the cascading compromises that had characterized late-war submarine production. The main induction valve, critical for preventing water entry when submerged, showed evidence of hand-fitting that suggested manufacturing tolerances were no longer being met. The torpedo tube door seals were made from mixed batches of rubber with visible differences in material properties. Even the battery compartment ventilation system showed signs of improvised modification to compensate for design flaws that were never properly corrected. Lieutenant Commander Margaret Sullivan, the team's electrical systems specialist, made a discovery that added another layer to the story. While tracing chronic electrical shorts in the control room, she found that insulation on major cable runs had been degraded not by age, but by constant exposure to moisture. When she pulled samples for analysis, she found that the insulation material itself was substandard. Sullivan reported with clinical precision, "This is not rubber insulation. This is some sort of synthetic compound that was never designed for high humidity environments. It absorbs water like a sponge, which then provides a conductive path for electrical leakage. The result is chronic shorts, blown fuses, and equipment failures." The German electrical diagrams show proper rubber insulation specified, but what was actually installed was this synthetic substitute. Someone in the supply chain made a substitution, probably due to rubber shortages, and these boats went to sea with electrical systems that were compromised from day one. By mid-June, Hartford's team had assembled a comprehensive picture of the Type 9 submarine as a case study in industrial desperation. Their technical report would run to 342 pages, with appendices documenting every failure mode, every material substitution, every manufacturing shortcut they had identified. But the essential finding could be stated in a single sentence. These submarines had been sent to sea in a condition that American naval standards would have classified as unfit for service. The question that haunted Hartford was not technical, but moral. Had the men who sailed in these vessels understood how compromised their equipment was? The answer came from an unexpected source. In late June, the team received a package forwarded through British intelligence. It contained the personal diary of Captain Lieutenant Werner Hoffmann, commander of U-785, which had been lost with all hands in the North Atlantic in March 1945. The diary had been found in Hoffmann's shore quarters during the post-war occupation. British intelligence had translated it and forwarded relevant excerpts to the American evaluation team. Hoffmann's entries from his final patrol were difficult to read. January 15, 1945. We departed Kristiansand this morning, knowing the boat is in poor condition. The engineering officer reports excessive leakage from at least 12 major hull penetrations. The control room watchstanders will be standing in water if we encounter any serious depth charging. I have reported this to command, but operational requirements dictate we proceed. The men know the situation. I see it in their faces during the pre-patrol briefing. They know we are sailing in a deteriorating vessel, and they go anyway because that is what we do. Because Germany needs every submarine at sea, regardless of condition. February 3rd. We are 15 days into patrol, and the leakage situation has worsened as expected. The forward torpedo room reports water accumulation that requires pumping every 30 minutes. The electrical shorts have blown 6 fuses in the past 2 days. We are carrying spares, but at this rate we will exhaust our supply before the patrol ends. The men work constantly just to keep the boat operational. This is not submarine warfare as it was intended. This is survival engineering. March 2nd. Today we came close to losing the boat without any enemy action. During a dive to avoid aircraft, water entry into the control room increased so dramatically that we nearly lost depth control. Only the quick action of the diving officer and his crew kept us from going too deep. When we surfaced after the aircraft departed, we spent 4 hours pumping and attempting repairs. The men are exhausted. The boat is exhausted, but we continue the patrol because those are our orders. There were no entries after March 7th. U-785 was posted as missing on March 21st, presumed lost with all hands. Hartford read Hoffmann's diary in his quarters late one evening and found himself unable to sleep. The technical failures his team had documented were no longer abstract engineering problems. They were the daily reality of men who had gone to sea knowing their vessel was flawed, who had operated equipment they knew was compromised, who had lived with water dripping on their faces in the knowledge that the next depth charge attack might exploit weaknesses their own engineers had documented. The final phase of the investigation focused on understanding why this situation had been allowed to develop. Hartford requested and received access to captured German naval production records, quality control reports, and technical correspondence between submarine construction yards and naval command. The documents told a story of an industrial system collapsing under impossible demands. A report from the Bloemenvoss shipyard in Hamburg, dated November 1943, was particularly revealing. The current production schedule requires delivery of 1 Type 9 submarine every 18 days. This schedule is incompatible with maintaining proper quality control standards. We have submitted multiple requests for additional time to properly test and certify vessels before delivery. These requests have been denied. We are furthermore experiencing severe shortages of proper submarine-grade steel, forcing the use of alternative materials that do not meet design specifications. We have documented these material substitutions in our quality reports, but operational demands require that we continue production. The submarines being delivered are not meeting original design standards, but represent the best we can accomplish under current conditions. A response from Naval Headquarters was attached. Your concerns are noted. However, strategic requirements dictate maximum production rates regardless of technical constraints. Submarines must be delivered according to schedule. Quality issues will be addressed through operational modifications and increased maintenance cycles. But the maintenance cycles never materialized. Submarines went on patrol with documented deficiencies because the strategic situation demanded every available vessel at sea. Crews adapted to equipment failures because adaptation was the only option available. The institutional system had made a calculated decision to accept significant technical risk in exchange for maintaining operational numbers. Lieutenant Mackenzie summarized the situation during the team's final briefing. They knew these boats were flawed. They documented the flaws. They sent men to sea in them anyway, because the alternative was to have fewer submarines on patrol. It was a command decision to accept risk at the individual vessel level in order to maintain strategic pressure at the theater level. The men paid the price. The revelation that shocked the American team most profoundly came from analyzing loss data in conjunction with the technical failures they had documented. Of the 753 submarines that had been operational during the conflict, 683 had been lost. The casualty rate was over 90%. While enemy action accounted for the majority of losses, the captured records suggested that technical failures had played a role in a significant number of cases. A report from the Submarine Command, dated April 1945, found among captured documents, was particularly striking. Analysis of patrol reports indicates that approximately 30% of premature patrol terminations are due to technical failures rather than enemy action or fuel constraints. Most common failures involve water intrusion into critical systems, electrical shorts due to moisture exposure, and diesel engine problems related to poor quality replacement parts. These technical reliability issues are reducing our effective patrol time by an estimated 25 to 30%. The human cost of this industrial gamble was calculated by Lieutenant Morrison. Using German casualty records, she determined that approximately 30,000 men had served aboard submarines during the conflict. Of these, 28,000 had died. The survival rate was less than 7%. Morrison presented her findings with visible emotion. These men went to sea in vessels that leaked from the day they were launched. They lived with water dripping on electrical panels, with chronic equipment failures, with bilge pumps running continuously. And they did this knowing that the casualty rate among their service was catastrophic. The combination of technical unreliability and enemy action created a situation where survival was statistically improbable, yet they continued to sail. Hartford's final report to Naval Headquarters concluded with an assessment that was both technical and philosophical. The Type 9 submarine represents an engineering compromise of staggering proportions. These vessels were designed with great care and attention to detail, but were manufactured under conditions that made it impossible to maintain design standards. The result was a weapon system that was inherently unreliable, chronically prone to water intrusion, and dependent on constant crew intervention to remain operational. That these submarines achieved the operational results they did is a testament not to their engineering excellence, but to the determination and skill of the men who operated them under impossible conditions. Our evaluation has revealed that the myth of invincible engineering excellence was exactly that, a myth. The reality was desperate improvisation, accepted risk, and thousands of young men who sailed into danger, knowing their equipment was fundamentally flawed. The captured submarine U-505 remained at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard for 3 additional months, while Hartford's team completed their detailed documentation. In September 1945, she was towed to deep water off the Massachusetts coast and scuttled as part of Operation Deadlight. She rests now in 200 meters of water, slowly leaking as she did from the day she was launched. The technical intelligence gathered from the evaluation would influence American submarine design for decades. The lessons learned about quality control, material standards, and the dangers of production pressure over engineering excellence would be incorporated into naval construction protocols. But the deeper lesson about men who went to sea in vessels they knew were compromised would be harder to quantify or apply. Klaus Richter, the German mechanic who had provided so much insight during the evaluation, was repatriated to Germany in October 1945. Before he departed, Hartford asked him one final question. Knowing what you knew about the condition of these submarines, why did you continue to serve on them? Richter's answer carried the weight of experience that could not be summarized in technical reports. Because my comrades were going to sea regardless, Herr Kommandant, if I did not sail with them, someone less experienced would take my place, someone who might not know how to jury-rig a failing pump or bypass a shorted electrical panel, someone who might not recognize when the hull was stressed beyond safe limits. I went because I might make the difference between the crew getting home or not. In the end, it was not about the boat or the strategic situation. It was about the men beside you. You went because they went. You made it work because they needed you to make it work. The boats leaked, the equipment failed, and we went to sea anyway because that is what we did. The evaluation report was classified upon completion and would remain so until 1976, when it was finally declassified and released to the Naval Historical Center. The technical findings would be studied by submarine designers and naval architects for decades, providing insight into the dangers of compromising engineering standards under operational pressure. But the human story of men who sailed in vessels they knew were flawed would resonate far beyond technical circles. Hartford continued his naval career, eventually reaching the rank of Rear Admiral and serving as Director of Submarine Warfare Development. In his retirement memoir, published in 1979, he devoted an entire chapter to the U-505 evaluation. His conclusion reflected decades of reflection on what he had learned. We went into that evaluation expecting to find engineering excellence that we could learn from and perhaps fear. What we found instead was evidence of an industrial system that had collapsed under impossible demands, and men who had adapted to equipment failures that would have grounded American vessels immediately. The lesson was not about their engineering superiority. It was about the danger of allowing operational demands to override engineering standards, and about the courage of men who went to sea anyway. Every time I have reviewed a submarine design or authorized a vessel for service, I have thought about those leaking hulls and the men who sailed in them. Their story has made me a better engineer and a more cautious commander. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.